Hello, folks. Yes, the time has come for us to record our last video in this playlist called The History of Brazil in English. And I would say that this is the last video for now, because so far uh, we've been experiencing Lula's third presidential term. And as soon as it is finished, I will have to record a new video on this last term of Lula. And I don't know if he's going to be reelected, but anyways. But for now, this is going to be our last video. With historical content for this playlist, because I might also record other videos, this time with exercises on these recent videos that I've been recording. Okay, since Lula to Bolsonaro, Jair Messias Bolsonaro, who happens to be the president that we will be studying about now. So yes, for starters, I must recognize that I'm dealing with a wasp's nest. Because if you thought that the Brazilian nation was polarized by the end of Michel Temer's government, you have no idea how polarized it will become during and even after Jair Bolsonaro's term as president. And by the way, the social media played a major role in the increase of polarization, of political polarization in Brazil. And Jair Bolsonaro used the social media brilliantly to get elected, right? As a matter of fact, and you can see here his picture, Jair Bolsonaro he showed up as an outsider. He liked to use this image of an outsider trying to fix the political scenario of Brazil. And yes, the people was really tired because, corruption, let's be honest here, right? Corruption has been around since the onset of humankind, right? But specifically here in Brazil, it had been suffocating since the first term of Lula as president until Michel Temer. And the whole nation, the whole Brazilian nation was tired of that. They wanted to find someone who could somehow get rid of all this corruption and implement a fair political term as president in Brazil. Now, the whole world was witnessing at the time this increased right-wing ideological popularity, right? And here in Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro managed to be the perfect person to meet all the expectations from the Brazilian people. Well, as I was saying, he liked this. He liked to use this image of an outsider, someone who came out of nowhere, and that was now in the political scenario. But honestly, Jair Bolsonaro had been involved in the Brazilian politics for 27 years before his presidential term. 27 years. And, he was a federal deputy, and he was very much known for this hardline rhetoric. And he always liked to boast that he missed the times of the military dictatorship, that he didn't really used to call dictatorship. Just military regime was better for him, right? So, he was very aggressive in his progressive social agendas, and that kind of resemblance and this missing the old military days in Brazil kind of like caused this nostalgia feeling in many Brazilians, you know? And by the way, that thing blended with ignorance. Because please, if you haven't watched my videos, my previous videos on the military dictatorship in Brazil, I urge you to kindly go there and watch these videos because, or at least one video, I think, because it will help you understand why the political regime, the political dictatorship in Brazil was chaotic and destructive and evil and wicked. Although people who lived at the time, including my father, would often would often portray, those days as the best ones in the history of Brazil. But that is not true. That was part of the military regime propaganda at the time. But all those people from that generation, not all of them, but I mean a great number of people from that time, when they looked at Jair Bolsonaro, saying that he missed those days, that those days were perfect, those days were just so good, they were like, oh yeah, it's true. And they are going to be supporting Jair Bolsonaro because of that. And believe me, I'm not talking about few people. I'm talking about a bunch of people here, right? So his election in 2018 occurred in this context of widespread dissatisfaction with traditional parties, right? Especially PT. The Brazilian people was tired, dead tired of hearing about corruption allegations involving the Workers' Party, PT, right? So they wanted to break with PT in Brazil. And I can tell you that this is not really different from what we see nowadays in our current political scenario. But let's get back, to Jair Bolsonaro's times, Anyways, um, also those were days of the car wash operation. We have here in this picture. Let me show you this picture. This is a very emblematic picture. Here on your right, you have Judge Sergio Moro, who was acclaimed. I mean, the guy was seen as a hero at the time because he was the one who was judging many people. I mean, many people involved with the Workers' Party at the time, and the corruption allegations involving the Workers' Party back then to the 2000s. But not only them, but especially Lula. Yes, Lula, former president of Brazil, was being accused of many corruption allegations, and he was being judged by Sergio Moro, right? He was being heard here by Sergio Moro. And wow, that was just awesome for Jair Bolsonaro's supporters. And as a matter of fact, in 2018, Lula is going to be condemned to jail, right? And I am going to show you a video of that day. I mean, because it was such an operation, guys, you have no idea. Firstly, Lula, I mean, he protested. He said, I mean, he claimed he was innocent, and he really delayed, I mean, the whole police operation to take him to jail. But he was a former president and he had many supporters. So he was like, trusting in all of these factors, to delay, the whole police operation with no big trouble, no big problems for him, right? So this is a picture showing, I mean, how important Moro was at the time. Later on, his status would really decay. because he tried to enter into the political scenario and he was not successful during that time. So nowadays, Moto is not really, uh, this important and holy figure as he used to be. But at the time, yes, not only Moto, but the whole car wash operation, which was very important, because after all, it happened, you know, I mean, it cost many and many millions of dollars and reais to return to the government, right? It was money that had been either laundered or, I don't know, stolen. And, the car wash operation managed to return all this money, to the Brazilian government, not the Brazilian people. Okay, let's make it clear. So I'm going to show you the video of this big operation here in Brazil. Let me find here this video, just a minute. You're probably going to see this video with certain delay, but yes, just a minute because I'm doing it all live here, but it's gonna work. I have the video here. Let me just rewind it a little bit. Be calm, be patient, and it's going to work out. Okay. All right. Let's watch it.
With a federal warrant demanding he be arrested in order to begin serving a 12-year.
Let me play it again since the beginning. Oh. Okay. Yeah, let's start now.
In breaking news, Brazil's former president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has complied with a federal warrant demanding he be arrested in order to begin serving a 12-year sentence for corruption, a warrant both Lula and his lawyers insist is illegal. Lula left the Metal Workers Union where he was staying, and he was driven away in a police car in a convoy and heavy security. He must now travel to Curitiba. Lula waved to supporters gathered outside Sao Paulo's Steelworkers Union building, where he has been staying in defiance of a judge's order to start his sentence. Brazil's first working-class president has insisted on his innocence and has called that his conviction on bribery is a political move.
Okay, let me go back now to our handout. Yes, I believe you can see me again. So yeah, guys, as you could see, that was really an operation. And that marked a successful era of the car wash operation, right? And all of this worked together to benefit Jair Bolsonaro. The people saw Jair Bolsonaro as the way out, the only way out to get rid of corruption, of political corruption once for all in Brazil, right? So let me scroll down here. To finish it off, during his work on the streets to be elected as president, we had this stabbing, right? That we had this situation in which Jair Bolsonaro was stabbed. And yeah, many people in Brazil say that, it was not really like that. But officially, yes, among this broader global wave of right-wing populism, Bolsonaro in his anti-system, anti-corruption, and law and order platform was stabbed, right? He was stabbed, and that, this stabbing that worked, that stabbing that happens during a campaign made him even more successful. He luckily managed to survive the stabbing, and he got stronger than ever after that. Well, the thing is that after all this campaigning for the elections, Bolsonaro was elected president of Brazil. You could see his picture above. And what Bolsonaro did was basically in the beginning of 2019 was, firstly, he promised that all those things that they said about him, because he was pretty anti-feminist, he was pretty anti-universities and anti-education. Uh, he was more into the technical sphere of education. I mean, like, what I'm trying to say is that physics, mathematics is okay because that is going to help you produce, I don't know, technology, and that's going to make Brazil prosper, right? But philosophy, sociology, no way. This is just absurd. This is what Jair Bolsonaro is going to be constantly preaching. And the whole nation, when he became elected, uh, was kind of like afraid, what are we going to be experiencing now? I mean, there were many people that, they were like partying and like, wow, this time corruption will end, will cease to exist. We're going to have a very prosperous government. But there were, those that opposed Bolsonaro, they were like, my gosh, what is going to happen now? So we had a very divided, polarized nation. And one of the reasons why Bolsonaro won the election is because Lula was now in jail, right? Because Lula had already manifested a desire to become president again. And he used to say that if he ran for presidency again, he would win. And I believe this is pretty much possible because he said the same thing now a few years ago, and he got elected against Bolsonaro. So the same thing might have happened at the time, but who knows? This is just, those famous ifs that nobody can ever sort out, right? But the thing is that Jair Bolsonaro, despite saying that it's okay, that he would not be this monster that the opposition was saying, he clearly built his term on an ideological orientation and government and governing, and governing style that were really peculiar. And basically, we had three pillars sustaining this ideological platform. So first, he was strongly opposing to feminist movements. Secondly, he had he would constantly um, give speeches against LGBTQIA plus rights. He was constantly saying how much he was against indigenous land expansion. And as I had said previously, he was, he would constantly mention, his progressive education policies, meaning that he was against certain subjects such as philosophy, human subjects in general. He was against them. Why? Because those subjects would help people remain alienated. Well, supposedly they would help people think, right? Yes, and obviously, many people clapped him as he opposed, such subjects at school because they would look at universities, public universities here in Brazil, and I mean, people would look at these universities and they were clearly falling apart. And you would see banners with socialism sentences or communist sentences everywhere. And that was not cool. So Jair Bolsonaro, he found more and more strength through these kind of scenarios, through these kind of realities that we can see in Brazil, right? Now, Yes, he would refer to these, to the reality in these public universities as cultural Marxism. If he's wrong, if he's right, I mean, we would have to discuss that, right? Now, the second pillar, economic liberalism. So, one of the gurus that Jair Bolsonaro placed in the government to help him undertake his liberalism vision was Paulo Guedes, right? He was the so-called super minister of the economy, right? And through Paulo Guedes, Jair Bolsonaro was able to promote privatizations, fiscal austerity, pension reform. That was the most important thing that he could do in his first year of government. And he also managed to reduce the state's role in the economy. You know, also the third, not the third pillar, sorry, a sub pillar, let's say, authoritarian and militarized discourse. So, yes, um, he would constantly praise the military. Um, he would constantly question democratic institutions when he was challenged. He would constantly frame opponents as enemies of the nation, right? And he was very, very, he had this very confrontational style against the press. We would constantly see him there at Palácio da Alvorada in Brasilia, attacking, harshly responding against, the press arguments, the press um, contundent affirmations against his government, right? And the third pillar, yes, institutional relations and democracy. Although he affirmed a lot of things, in favor of the military regime, Jair Bolsonaro somehow surprisingly often affirmed democracy, right? So, at least during his government, okay? Um, well, he would also attack the judiciary power and the Supreme Court in Brasilia. That was something that would often happen as well, because Jair Bolsonaro would often interfere in executive powers. He would demonize, the Supreme Court. He would promote judicial activism, and then we had COVID-19. You remember that year, right? 2020, right at the beginning, the initial months of the year of 2020, we had this bomb exploding all over the world. And it exploded so fast that we didn't even have time to react. Now, right in the beginning, lots of people using or wearing masks, but not Jair Bolsonaro. Not Jair Bolsonaro. I'm going to show you, these pictures here. Let me find the pictures. You can see lots of people here wearing masks, but not Jair Bolsonaro. And the death toll was really huge. Take a look at all those people dead, buried without a right to a burial ceremony. You remember that if you live during this time. Well, it was chaotic. It was chaotic. Let me scroll up here. Yes, it was really chaotic. And Bolsonaro, as the leader of the nation, played a major role in the number of people that died in this period of his government, including the COVID-19. Because as the leader of the nation, many people will mirror themselves in what their leader is doing. And Bolsonaro would publicly avoid wearing masks. And that caused people to think that, oh, it's no big deal. These reporters are just making a mess out of that. But that was not the case, because day after day, the number of people dying from COVID would increase more and more. But his attitude changed very little, actually, this little. And when he was questioned by the judiciary concerning the reason why he didn't wear the mask, not even publicly, he would just he would just accuse, the Supreme Court, the judiciary power of corruption, of political persecution. And, well, that caused democracy to backslide. That was a very complicated times. That was a very complicated time, because this rhetoric raised concerns about democratic backsliding. But luckily, the democratic institutions did not break down. So that was a good thing. Well, inside the government, initially everything was okay, but more and more, Jair Bolsonaro would find himself in a tight spot. So, despite campaigning against old politics, the way that the Workers' Party was used to deal with politics and so on, Bolsonaro eventually formed alliances with the so-called Centrão. Centrão was not the left wing, neither the left wing parties nor the right wing parties, but this bloc, this middle term bloc formed by pragmatic, patronage oriented parties. Parties that were like just waiting to see what would happen and accepting to get support, so that they may feel incentivized to make their decisions. Yeah, he pretty much aligned with this middle bloc, right? He used traditional political bargaining to avoid impeachment because of all the accusations, in the middle of the COVID-19. And it's very difficult to say, it's very difficult to state, to declare without a doubt how well he performed in economic terms after 2020. What I can say is that in 2019, Brazil grew very slightly in political and economic terms. Actually, in political terms, we were like experiencing right at the beginning, this turmoil, this very turbulent thing going on in Brazil that was a little above Michel Temer and Dilma Rousseff. But in economic terms, 2019 was not that great, and 2020 was chaotic. 2021 was chaotic as well, because the whole world was chaotic, right? We had countries such as the USA that were spending rivers and rivers of dollars, having to support and help people who were getting sick or even dying, right? Yeah, so it was a tough time. It was a tough time. The flagship achievement in 2019 for Jair Bolsonaro was the pension reform. I mean, he did it, right? He was praised by markets, yeah, because it obviously helped companies. But on the other hand, he was criticized for disproportionately affecting poorer layers of the population, right? Um, well, as I said, in economic terms, we had this whole mass of COVID-19 taking place all over the world. So I clearly remember that, he was obligated to transfer emergency cash during the pandemic, the so-called auxílio emergencial or emergency aid that would temporarily reduce poverty, help people deal with what was going on. That would help people who were being dismissed by companies because the whole labor market was just going crazy. And during this time, I clearly remember that remotely working became something very common because people had to adapt to the new reality of the pandemic, right? And it was chaotic, very chaotic. And if that was not enough, we had issues involving environmental policies and indigenous policies as well, right? It was no secret that he was not really in favor of the indigenous people in Brazil. But the fact is that Bolsonaro's environmental agenda was among the most internationally criticized. So, he would often criticize, Obama. He would often publicly show skepticism toward climate change. He would have this rhetoric portraying environmental protection as obstacles to development. And he would even question the figures. He would question the figures. And that's not the only field in which he would question figures. He would question, this is something we're going to address shortly, but he would question figures involving his second election, his second campaign against Lula. But anyways, even though, I mean, he could not respond, to all these environmental accusations against him. Yes, the Amazon lost many and many hectares of forest because of, all this deforestation and those fires spreading all over the nation. And all the information regarding, these things that were happening in environmental terms were either suffocated or heavily criticized by him and the government. I remember that day after day, his vice president, Mourão, would emphasize how hard they were working to protect the Amazon, to combat deforestation. But at the end of the day, nothing was really happening. I mean, no success could be seen through these heroic policies that they said they were implementing to contain deforestation and to limit deforestation and the fires all over the country. Well, still about the COVID-19 pandemic, as I said, Jair Bolsonaro would constantly minimize the severity of the COVID-19. Let me put it here. He would constantly minimize. Oh, I think I hadn't shown you the pictures, right? If I didn't show you the pictures, you can see them here, right? Jair Bolsonaro with wearing no masks and lots of people dying every day. I don't know about you guys, but I clearly remember that on TV, these figures would be updated day by day. and they were just outrageous. And day after day, Bolsonaro would downplay the severity of the virus. He would even oppose lockdowns. And not only that, sorry, he would promote unproven treatments. Yes. And that thing just, I mean, contaminated the minds of people everywhere in the world like a glue. I have friends, even in the US, that are against proven treatments, that they are against vaccines. And because of that, because of this guy's promotion of improvement treatments, many and many people that didn't have to die ended up dying. And he delayed early vaccine negotiations. And by the way, there was a lot of corruption involving vaccines at the time in Brazil, a lot of corruption. So for those who saw Jair Bolsonaro as the messiah of corruption, you know, corruption just resumed, just remained a reality of Brazilians, even in this time of the pandemic, even involved the survival or death of many people who would need the vaccine. And that was, I mean, these actions contributed to high mortality rates, as we read here, and a Senate inquiry, CPI da Covid, identified serious failures in the federal response and lots of corruption. Lots of people making money over people's death. Yeah, this is really crazy. Well, in terms of international alignment, let me see if I have other videos for you. Just a minute. Yes, I think I have here. Oh, yeah. I'm going to show you this video with showing rallies in support of Bolsonaro. And they were supporting, I'm so sorry if you cannot see me, but I promise I'll be back in a while. Just a minute. Let me see. Okay, I do have it here. Please be patient with me. Yes, there you go. So in this video, for example, in Brazil's Independence Day during the pandemic, we're gonna see rallies, in favor and anti-Bolsonaro. And Bolsonaro here would praise the military. He would take advantage of these celebration to praise the military in a time when people were dying, in despite of all the figures showing how many people died in the military dictatorship days, right? And not only that, but he would criticize and even accuse and suggest violence against the press. Take a look at that.
We can talk now to our correspondent in Rio de Janeiro, Tim Vickery. Tim, talk to us about what it is Bolsonaro is trying to achieve today.
Well, he's turned a national celebration into a political event. He's looking to rally his base. His approval rating is down to 24%, but there is some very, very solid support remaining in that 24%. And we're seeing today the power of mobilization that he still has. This demonstration, he's been preparing this for 2 months. It's been called very much against the Supreme Court. There are two villains here in the eyes of Bolsonaro: Minister Moraes, who's conducting investigations into the Bolsonaro political clan, and Minister Barroso, who's the president of the Electoral Committee. Bolsonaro is desperate to ditch Brazil's electronic voting system, although he can produce no proof of fraud, and he sees Barroso as blocking that. Now, the striking thing about these issues is that they have so little to do with day-to-day governance. Brazil is going through serious problems, not only the coronavirus pandemic, but stagnant GDP, unemployment, poverty, galloping food inflation, and the possibility of the rationing of electricity. So in this scenario, it's striking that Bolsonaro has so much power of mobilization, even using issues that have very little to do with the day-to-day reality of the people.
And Tim, I mentioned that there are rallies today planned not just in support of Bolsonaro, but against him as well. How concerned are the police about violence?
Just as we speak, I can hear shouts from both sides of the political divide outside my window. This is a very serious issue in Brazil at the moment, and no one knows exactly how this day is going to play out. The more extreme followers of Bolsonaro may well be looking to provoke something like January the 6th in the United States with an invasion of the Supreme Court. That's what the far-right activists were threatening when they invaded the Esplanade in Brasilia yesterday. And as well as international concern, there are also counter demonstrations. Brazil is dangerously polarized politically, and today is maybe a test event for the threat of political violence that we have not only today, but in the build-up to the elections, which are more than a year away.
All right, Tim Vickery, for now, thanks very much indeed for your reporting from Rio de Janeiro. We'll keep talking to Tim throughout the day as we're watching the situation for you there in Brazil.
Okay, let me find a new video, just a minute. And this time, you're gonna see a rare Jair Bolsonaro wearing a mask. Here, however, he's going to threaten one of the reporters. Let's see.
For the latest, we can talk now to our correspondent in Rio de Janeiro.
Oh, not this one, sorry. This is the same. Yeah, I found it here. Sorry about that. Okay, where is it? I believe you can see this, right? But just in case, yeah. Okay, take a look at how he refers to the press.
For a time, Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro was heeding the advice of his aides and suppressing his urge to lash out at journalists. But now the truce with the media has just ended.
Quando pega num bundão de vocês, a chance de sobreviver é bem menor.
Earlier this week, Bolsonaro called journalists wimps, saying they would likely die of COVID-19 because, unlike himself, they aren't athletes. Before that, he told a reporter he would like to punch him in the face.
He's just said
the journalist had asked Bolsonaro about several alleged deposits amounting to almost $16,000 reportedly deposited into his wife's bank account by Fabrício de Queiroz, a family friend and former aide now in prison on corruption charges. Queiroz is at the center of a corruption probe involving the president's eldest son, Senator Flávio Bolsonaro, and which is increasingly focusing attention on the president himself.
Bolsonaro was elected on an anti-corruption platform, but his narrative that he's different from all other Brazilian politicians and is immune to corruption is not so convincing anymore. His son is being accused of participating in a racket scheme, of hiring employees and keeping a part of their salaries for themselves.
Meanwhile, the president is on the campaign trail. In November, there will be municipal elections in Brazil, and the president seems to be preparing the ground for his own re-election in another 2 years. He's been traveling all over the country, inaugurating plants and visiting the poorest Brazilian states in the north and northeast. 2 polls show Bolsonaro's popularity on the rise, even though Brazil has the world's second largest COVID-19 outbreak, and despite criticisms that the president has downplayed the pandemic.
You can't blame Bolsonaro for the virus, which is all over the world. I believe Bolsonaro is a good man, and even if he's not, there's nobody else. The previous leftist governments were corrupt.
But political analyst Mauricio Santoro says government handouts are playing an important part in Bolsonaro's popularity.
In Brazil, since the beginning of the pandemic, we have an emergency aid that it's more or less 60% of the minimum wage, and it's reaching almost half of the country, so it's really big.
What will happen when the money runs out by the end of the year remains to be seen. Monica Yanakiev, Al Jazeera, Rio de Janeiro.
Okay, guys. Yes. Let me go back here to my handout. Where is it? Yes, I found it. Okay. So basically, I mean, you could see in this last video how aggressive he was towards the press, the Supreme Court, even in the, I mean, in the pinnacle of the pandemic, he would rarely wear a mask, and that sends a message to the Brazilian people, especially to his supporters, right? And it was chaotic. It was chaotic, and day after day, he would say a lot of fake things. And by the way, during this time, we had the rise of the so-called fake news, right? Which he would constantly be using. By the way, yeah, because as I said, he used the social media massively, not only during his campaigning but also during his presidential term. So internationally, I mean, he just aligned with the USA, and because of all his problems involving environmental issues in Brazil, he faced diplomatic isolation, and he had this many strains with European Union. Yeah, it was a very bad time. And by the way, President Lula later on, in his effort to be elected, to be re-elected, recalled, this bad international uh, policy that was applied, in the Bolsonaro's days. Um, yeah, as I said, social policy, culture, and education. I mean, the administration adopted a confrontational approach towards universities, artists, yes, artists, cultural institutions marked by budget cuts and ideological disputes in education and cultural policy. Obviously, uh, some of the things, I'm not saying that everything was totally bullshit, among what he was saying concerning artists, for example. Yes, in Brazil, we have, for example, many artists that will often get a lot of money with their concerts, and they will be privileged in some government actions that supposedly should favor not really famous artists, but that ended up favoring the big artists, the celebrities, right? And we know that there are wrong things there, but that doesn't justify all these other things here involving universities, artists, cultural institutions, and the way he handled the situation. And I'm trying to be as impartial as I can. It's not easy, right? But I cannot simply just get blindfolded and say that I never saw those things going on. I saw that. So sometimes, yeah, he might mention stuff like this, cultural institutions, artists that were making money illegally, or at least it should be investigated. But in most of the cases, we saw a president not wearing a mask and like influencing or having a say in the way that the people would behave. And because the people thought that it was okay not to wear a mask, many people died. You know, the way he criticized universities in general, like generalizing something, like combating philosophy, sociology, which are essential for formatting the way we see life, reality in a critical manner, which is indispensable, right? So pretty much what he was saying, the message here was do not think. Do not think critically. Just accept everything I'm saying. he would often answer like, "My gosh, can you not see what I'm seeing?" As if it was obvious. I mean, all the bullshit that he sometimes said, you know. Um, so, in terms of communication, media polarization, I mean, even though the media try it, I mean, to denounce, to whistle blow, all those things happening in the way that he governed the country. We had at the end of his term even more an even more polarized country, a really divided nation, lots of ignorance, lots of fake news going on, and even so, I mean, after around 2022, the country showed how divided it was by almost electing him as president. And because of that, Bolsonaro questioned the integrity of Brazil's electronic voting system. And he even delayed the recognition of the result. Not only that, but when Lula assumed power in Brazil, I mean, the day before, I'm not sure, but before the inauguration of Lula's term, Bolsonaro, I mean, in an unprecedented move, just traveled abroad, not to see Lula here in Brazil being inaugurated as president. I mean, this was horrible. I mean, no matter how much you dislike your opponent, you have to be an honored politician, an honored server of the country, and recognize the defeat at an election, right? And this is not what he did. And as a consequence, I mean, this generated, obviously, this will impact the way people think of politics and see the political scenario, right? Now, I will save in some time here to basically, oops, I'm not sure what I'm showing you now, but yeah, I'm still showing you the handout. Yeah, let me go back here. All right. So I was waiting here to tell you something because I know that people will certainly say that I was not impartial. And I try my best, guys, but it's really difficult to be impartial, right? It's really difficult to be impartial. So, anyways, I prepared material concerning the Lula proceeding. Because Lula was arrested and then he was released. And many people questioned that, and I myself questioned that because, I mean, it's kind of strange, right? Because after so many days and months being judged by Sergio Moro, Lula was convicted, he was arrested, and later on, after more than 500 days, he would be released from jail. And all things that were against him, all the charges against him were simply annulled. And that was outrageous, So I want to give you a piece of information here so we may understand what really happened, right? So, yes, in March 2021, the Supreme Court of Brasilia, the STF, ruled that the federal courts of Brasilia, the STF ruled that the federal court of Curitiba, which was the car wash court, including Sergio Moro, had no jurisdiction to judge Lula's case. So the convictions were annulled and they were sent back to first instance to a competent court in Brasilia, right? So that was basically that was basically as if the case involving Sergio Moro against Lula had never ever happened. Now, There's also one thing here. In more than one occasion, Sergio Moro was really accused of partiality during the case. So there were procedural acts conducted under the judge, I mean Sergio Moro, that became tainted because of that. So at the end of the day, I mean the prosecution had to restart the procedure, the case, almost from zero. So the question is, okay, I understand, you might say, I understand why it was annulled. Okay, why the heck was it not annulled right at the beginning of the procedure? Because that involved politics. Sergio Moro was really in the pinnacle. The whole people wanted a right-wing president. Yeah, but along the time when Bolsonaro's image was being, I would say, stained, then it was, I mean, politicians, I mean, the Supreme Court felt like it would be easier to annul, this proceeding. So the whole thing is just bizarre because it should have been done right in the beginning. And what happened with that is that the Brazilian criminal law applies strict limitation periods that depend on the maximum penalty for the crime, the defendant's age, and the procedural interruptions. So the alleged case, sorry, not the alleged case, but the alleged acts regarding Lula's case dated almost or nearly from the 2000s. That was a long time. So the annulment erased prior convictions. Years passed during appeals and the STF review, right? So several charges became time-barred after being sent back to first instance. So, in short and hard words, the Brazilian state, lost the legal right to punish Lula, even if it wanted to do so. I mean, that sounds horrible. I don't want to really delve into details because I haven't studied law. So I don't want to make this video even longer than it already is. But I mean, at the end of the day, this is what happened. I mean, Lula, if intentionally or not, was released and doesn't have to be punished again. I mean, there is a likelihood, a small likelihood that one day someone might, prosecute him again. But that is going to be unprecedented. That is definitely not possible now because he is a president, right? And as a president, he is like armored. I mean, he's shielded against any charges at all against him. But later on, if he doesn't get reelected, yeah, those charges might show up again. But that's going to be really unprecedented. I don't believe that this is going to happen. And this really bothers me. Yes, this bothers me a lot because even if Sergio Moro was partial, had a certain inclination towards convicting Lula, that involved a lot of work, not only by Moro, not only by Moro, but by other people who were involved in the case. And it's not fair that suddenly all the evidence just vanishes away like that. So yes, this is bad. As far as I know, it is a legal problem that we have, and the Brazilian legislation tends to, to not punish, in this case, in this scenario of a long delay, instead of persecuting someone. So if you want to correct me, if you understand more about laws, you can feel free to correct me, okay? Well, guys, this is it. Basically, this is what I can tell you about Jair Messias Bolsonaro. So to finish off, the Bolsonaro government represents one of the most polarizing periods in contemporary Brazilian history, combining electoral legitimacy with persistent institutional conflict and long-lasting effects on political discourse and democratic stability. And it would take some time for the Brazilian nation to recover from that. Some say that Brazil still hasn't recovered. That might be true, but at least I feel that we're better than what we used to be in the days of Bolsonaro. Although it's difficult to judge Bolsonaro taking into consideration the days of the pandemic, because the whole world was crazy at the time. Now, if we think about 2022 and 2019, his government was no biggie, but even if it had been a great term, a great mandate, the legacy, this legacy of false information, polarization, lies, this legacy that Jair Bolsonaro left in his term, in his presidential term, cannot be erased. It is a reality, and history will not only record it, but keep it. Thank you so much for watching these videos. And if you have liked it, please don't forget to like it, to share it, and to make your comments, whether they are complaints, suggestions, or even compliments. Whatever it is, please let me know, okay? Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you in our next History of Brazil in English video. Bye-bye.